Our second scripture reading is found in the Gospel according to John, in the 21st chapter, beginning with the first verse. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon, Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." And they said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now, none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." It was John Shelby Spong who once said, "I believe that anything which begins to give people a sense of their worth and dignity is God." That bears repeating. I believe that anything that begins to give people a sense of their own worth and dignity is God. Well, now, if that is true, and I believe that at least to some extent it is, then the opposite must also be true. That anything which tears down a person's sense of worth, anything which breaks down a person's sense of dignity, is not of God. Now, by now you probably know I don't like absolutes very much. I'm not real big on clearly black and white statements which serve as declarations of ultimate truth. But I kind of like this one. Yeah, I'm picking and choosing. It's sort of an absolute. Anything which begins to give people a sense of worth and dignity is of God. And anything which breaks down people's sense of worth and dignity is not of God. With that as an introduction, let me say in regards to our gospel text, and I need to stop. Robert, we ask a lot of things of you. Would you get me some water, please? Thank you. You already got it? That is amazing. we don't need couples therapy. We are just right. We're right there, man. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. I'm amazed by that, Rob. I don't know that I can go any further. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, with that as an introduction, let me say in regards to our gospel text that Simon Peter has a problem. And nobody there to meet it as quickly as Robert met mine. And in this passage, he comes to us with that problem on full display. Simon Peter's problem is that he's lost himself. And I know that sounds like a modern problem. It sounds like something which might be dealt with in a psychotherapist's office. It has a contemporary ring to it. We speak of losing ourselves and then trying to find ourselves again. Nevertheless, in this ancient story from our sacred text, we encounter Simon Peter with this very problem. He has lost himself. He has lost all of that which gives him a sense of worth and dignity. Peter, it appears from what we know, was always a natural leader. If a question was asked, he was the first one with an answer, even if the answer was wrong. If a risk needed to be taken, he was the first one out of the boat to take that risk. It wasn't that long ago in the story of the gospel that we find Jesus recognizing the leadership potential of Peter, and Jesus declared that if the movement of Jesus was to go on after his death, it would be Peter who would be the rock of that movement. And yet, when this post-resurrection encounter concludes, we find Jesus asking Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" There is little doubt that our minds as the readers and Peter's as a participant in the story are meant to go back to Peter's 3-time denial of Jesus in the night and early morning hours that preceded his death. There are those who suggest that the problem which existed between Peter and Jesus. There was this wedge between them that needed to be fixed. If Peter was to reassume his place as the leader of Jesus' movement, things would need to be made right between Jesus and Peter. Seen in this light, when Jesus asked Peter to declare 3 times, "Do you love me?" it can be seen as sort of a passive-aggressive maneuver meant to remind him, "I remember what you did that night." It's a subtle reminder of Peter's failure when the chips were down. It's proverbial rubbing of the puppy's nose and carpet. Now, I'm not particularly comfortable with this image of Jesus and don't find it consistent with what actually happened. Peter's denial neither incited nor hastened the crucifixion of Jesus. Peter did not deny who Jesus was. What Peter did, if we will remember, is to claim 3 times that he did not know Jesus and was not a part of that family. Peter's problem, you see, is with himself. He lost not only his nerve and his courage, he has lost his sense of self. His sense of self-worth and his sense of dignity. He has lost his place. He has denied the connections which give him life. Before the church has even become the church, its restorative powers are put on full display right here on this beach. As Peter is restored to his place of leadership and service, and those go hand in hand, we are privy as witnesses to the capacity of the faith community to be a place where worth and dignity can be discovered and sometimes rediscovered. I apologize to you about my voice this morning. We cleaned pollen out of our backyard yesterday, and much of it has ended up in my lungs. Standing next to the sea in this encounter between Jesus and Peter, we see the faith community as the ground where people are not defined by their worst failure, but instead they are defined by the potential which still exists within them. Jesus sees Peter not as the one who failed in the critical moment, but as the one who continues to have the capacity to lead and serve. A Catholic theologian, Hans Küng, hails this restorative capacity of Jesus to be the most revolutionary aspect of his way of being. And if that is so, the faith community which bears Christ's name will be restorative in the same manner. Here's what he said. The absolutely unpardonable thing was not his concern for the sick, the cripples, the lepers, the possessed, not even his partnership for the poor, humble people. The real trouble was that he got involved with moral failures, with obviously irreligious and immoral people morally and politically suspect. So many dubious, obscure, abandoned, hopeless types existing as an evil on the fringe of every society. This was the real scandal. Did he really have to go this far? What kind of dangerous and naive love is this which does not know its limits, the frontiers between fellow countrymen and foreigners, party members and non-members, between neighbors and distant people, between honorable and dishonorable callings, between moral and immoral, good and bad people, as if disassociation were not absolutely necessary here, as if we ought not to judge in these cases, as if we can always forgive in these circumstances. It is widely accepted that the passage we have read this morning was not a part of John's original gospel, but instead it was added on by the church at a later date for specific purposes. Perhaps it was meant to establish Peter as the leader of the early church, but perhaps it was also meant to remind the church of what it can be at its best. This past Tuesday night, our Mission, Peace, and Justice Committee sponsored the viewing of a film, Youth versus Government. It is a documentary which follows a group of children and youth who sued the government of the United States for not taking measures which address climate change or other threats to the environment. The suit, in short and simple language, suggests that because of these failures of the government, the future of that generation was put in peril in an unconstitutional manner. Now, I assure you, any of us who watched it came away as concerned as ever about the threats to our planet, but I also came away curious. I came away curious about what sort of voices and what sort of influence inspired these young people and imbued them with this sense of worth and dignity to believe that they could take this stand against the government of the United States and that they could make this sort of difference. And I came away curious about what it would be like to bottle that kind of influence and then bring it to our churches and break it open and pour it everywhere. To pour it out in a manner which lifts us up out of the cynicism and discouragement that can come along with trying to impact the world. I want to lift up a word this morning. I want to lift up a word which helps to define what we can be for one another, what we can be for our children, what we can be for those souls seeking that sense of worth and dignity, and sometimes a restoration of that sense of dignity. The word is embolden. It's a verb. It's a good one at that. The church is being the church when it does this thing for one another. I once had a preaching professor that said, never use Webster's definitions in your sermon. He said it's tacky and cliche and it's overused. So you got to know by now I'm about to use Webster's dictionary. Embolden. Embolden is to give someone the courage or the confidence to do something or to behave in a certain way. Synonyms for embolden. And my preaching professor would hate this. Fortify, make brave or braver. Encourage, hearten, strengthen, brace, stiffen the resolve of, lift the morale of, rouse, stir, stimulate, cheer, rally, fire up, animate, inspirit, invigorate, or buck up. That's what we are here to do for one another. In June of 2015, I gathered with other pastors and community leaders in a service of prayer following the murderous shootings by Dylan Roof at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston. Even in a world where violent acts threaten to numb our senses, his actions left behind a collective state of shock. Several members of the local clergy, including myself, were asked to offer prayers as a part of the service. Near the end of that service, Reverend Jonathan Richardson from Stony Creek AME Church stood to pray. His prayer was labeled a prayer for courage and discernment. And in the style of many African American preachers, he began softly and slowly and worked his way up to a higher pitch. But before he was finished, his prayer seemed to be thundering both up and out from the pulpit. I can't recapture the whole prayer, and honestly didn't hear it all, because at some point he offered a petition of prayer that so arrested my attention, I didn't hear anything else. I truly apologize to you for this morning. Can we start that whole video thing next week, maybe? At some point, after he's made his way to this high point, he began to pray about the shooter, Dylann Roof. He said, Lord, help us to remember that he is a racist. Lord, help us to remember that Dylann Roof is a murderer. Lord, help us to remember that Dylann Roof's heart has become filled with hatred. And Lord, he prayed, help us to remember that Dylann Roof is a lost child. That last petition caught me so off guard, I've thought about it for years since. His prayer was a stark reminder that children are not born with hatred in their hearts. Children are not born with violent urges to eliminate those who differ from them or who they do not understand. Some children somewhere along the way, though, get lost. And any of us who have even a small part in shaping the world bear at least some responsibility to those countless children who get lost along the way. As Jesus stood on the shores with Simon Peter, he modeled another way. He modeled the way that leads to hope and restoration. He refused to let Simon Peter become a lost child. He refused to let Simon Peter be someone defined by his lowest moment in his darkest night. He refused to allow Peter to remain lost without a sense of worth and dignity. He refused to allow failure to be the last word. Instead, he called him and he emboldened him to his highest self, not only as a leader, but as a servant. Hasidic masters tell the story of a rabbi who disappeared into the woods on the eve of every Sabbath. His congregation thought that he went to commune with God. So one night they dispatched one of their people to follow the rabbi and observe what went on out there in the woods. Deeper and deeper into the woods, the rabbi went until he came to the small cottage of a Gentile woman. She was the widow of a man who had once persecuted their Jewish neighbors. Now she was sick, very sick, and stooped over. Once there, the rabbi cooked for her and carried her firewood and swept the floor. When he was finished, he returned immediately to his little house next to the synagogue. Back in the village, the people demanded of the one they had sent to follow him, "Did our rabbi go to heaven as we thought?" The man who had gone into the woods and witnessed this act said, "Oh no, he went much higher than that." We are called to the very same heights. There's no getting around that. And if we are to reach those heights, then we must embolden one another. We must lift up voices that allow each one of us to discover our worth and our dignity, both of which are immense. Yes, that is our pledge to one another. We will do these things. We will fortify one another. We will make one another brave and braver. We will encourage one another. We will hearten one another. We will strengthen one another. We will brace one another. We will stiffen the resolve of one another. We will lift the morale of one another. We will rouse one another. We will stir one another. We will stimulate one another. We will cheer one another. We will rally one another. We will fire up one another. We will animate one another and spirit one another. We will invigorate one another, and we will buck one another up, that we might all become those very people, servants and leaders that we've been made to